Joining us right now is Dr. Michael Shively. He is the Senior Advisor on Research and Data Analysis for the National Center for Sexual Exploitation. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Praise be to God. We are grateful for you being on with us today. The human trafficking is a plague that I think doesn't get enough attention in the world. It affects so many, not only those that are trafficked, but those that would participate in the trafficking, for instance, just buying pornography online or viewing it or distributing it, hitting the share button on their social feeds. I think a lot of people their hands are dirty in all of this. Can you give us a sense of the scope? No one really has a magic number. So sometimes you can get drawn into arguments about, what is the number of trafficked people, how many people view pornography, and it's easy to get hung up on those things. But if you look at everything in front of you and all the data, it's obvious the scope is massive. It's much harder to avoid pornography as a child than it is to access it. And that is very different than it was 10 years ago. Studies are coming out pretty fast and furious now that show that children early in their teens are having their own cell phones, and by accident or on purpose, they are encountering the most horrific, hardcore, crazy child pornography, or what we like to call child sexual abuse materials, or CSAM. These things are just in front of them, and a great phrase. I wish I could attribute it to the right person, but I read something where a person described it this way: said the white van with the predator in it is now in your child's pocket, and it's their phone. Wow. And I think that really, to me, as a parent and as a person who's devoted to fighting this, that captures it, which is, it used to be when I was a kid. I'm old, I'm 60, and when I was a kid, you had to go to great lengths to access it if you wanted to, and most kids that are kids really didn't. Teenagers, curiosity, all that, but it used to take time and effort and money, and most people just didn't until they were young adults or older adolescents, and it was by today's standards, it was just so tame. I mean, now it almost looks quaint, even though we were horrified about it 50 years ago. So, it's really that. I think any parent will tell you that their kids are telling them about seeing things that they really shouldn't, have had any access to at all. And it's because the internet is just wide open. There's just so little accountability. There's so little effort that is being put into by the regulators and the government agencies to make it hard for particularly children to encounter not only pornography, but predation, the person-to-person predatory behavior. And, again, maybe it was the creepy person somewhere lurking, right? And you could kind of look out for it and tell your kids, don't go there, or look out for this or that. Now, if they're using the internet, they are vulnerable to someone grooming them, recruiting them, tricking them. And again, the numbers are terrifying, and there are plenty of numbers. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are just showing, massive increases in people, not only law enforcement agencies and service providers, but just parents, concerned citizens, witnesses. The tips they're getting are just growing exponentially in the last few years. And the whole, what the COVID pandemic did to people, which is drove people online, and it accelerated that trend that's been going on for, more than a decade. So everyone's online, and anyone with bad intent knows it, and they know that the most vulnerable people, housebound people, and kids are all ripe for the picking.
Wow, Doc, I think we run into the situation pretty often where parents will say, yeah, I know that it's difficult to avoid the subject of having a cell phone. Everybody has a cell phone, therefore I'm going to give one to my child. and they think they rely on these applications. They have some. I know Instagram, for example, has filters just in case you want to block any of that stuff out. But nonetheless, even with those filters, you still encounter materials that are questionable. I mean, for us Catholics, we want to defend the innocence of our children. We want to save our souls. Do you think that that's a reasonable thing to rely on?
It's a reasonable thing to have access to. It's a reasonable thing to expect you could have as an option is greater safety measures. You know, I think it's entirely reasonable. In fact, we should be expecting that safety comes first, and we should expect that people that are regulating the internet and people that are passing laws about what corporations that profit from internet businesses, you know, that they have an obligation to ensure that things like pornography, where, I mean, it's bad enough if it's consenting adults, but we know that a huge proportion of all of the trafficked pornography is either absolutely non-consensual, and you can prove it, or you don't know whether it is or not. And that's the consent part. And then there's the age part. So, you know, there's a whole genre of pornography that is devoted to young. And some of it is just outright children, and they know that. And we're talking babies, children, you know, toddlers. I mean, it goes down very, very dark, horrible end of the pool. Yeah. But the age verification and consent verification, one thing we know for sure is if you're doing nothing to ensure it, you are creating the worst possible scenario. Mm-hmm. And none of the measures are fail-safe, but they help. And the thing is, if you're not even trying to institute them, and you're not trying to perfect them, you're not trying to make them more and more, capable of catching the worst of the behavior and the worst of the material, then you're not doing enough. You know, and it's clear that we're not doing enough, because every single indicator, if you look at surveys of teens and children and young adults about what they've seen, what they've had access to, again, to get away from numbers and research, as a parent, my daughter was in dance teams. And these were very good kids, and they were very well protected. And there was a conversation after their high school event. We had about a dozen of them at our house, and this conversation came out about boys asking girls to take pictures of themselves and send them. And these very nice, very protected kids, every single one of them, 12 out of 12, said they had been asked.
Wow.
You know, so it's the new normal is for, you know, older children and young adolescents to these girls in particular, but boys too, they're going to be asked. You know, we can almost count on they're going to be asked. Now that, according to the law and according to any moral code you can think of, that is child pornography or CSAM. And again, it's become so normalized so fast that, well, you know, of course they're going to encounter stuff that isn't good, and it's, you know, well, we've always had to worry about adolescence and sexuality and temptations and all that. Well, this is different, you know, because it's hitting everyone, and it's hitting them younger and younger. So, you know, if you're not trying, you're not doing enough. And there are plenty of organizations that are trying, and there is progress being made, like us, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and plenty of other people. There's a lot of other people in this space are making headway in legislation. We're making headway with corporations. Apple's done some good things, you know, Google. I mean, there is progress to be made. It's never what we want, but you know, there are plenty of things that are possible, and something that just recently happened, in fact, it went into effect this week, is the state of Louisiana is instituting something. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, and people will complain, but they have instituted the nation's first law for age verification to access pornography. And so now we have a state with that law, and, you know, we can just keep moving in that direction.
We're down to just about a minute and a half here with Dr. Michael Shively, the Senior Advisor in Research and Data Analysis at EndSexualExploitation.org. What would be your best advice for parents at this point to help protect their children from being groomed or being exploited in any way?
Prepare, teach, model. It's, basic parenting 101. Faith is good. And also everything around that, just having a solid family and love and support for your kids is obviously the starting point. But, you need to start talking to them. And again, this is tricky. It's not simple, but the most important thing is to do something, even if you're not necessarily getting it right. But start talking to kids. You don't have to get into explicit detail or terrify them as little 8-year-olds or anything, but to have conversations about what they may encounter and to make sure that you're telling them if you see something strange that you don't understand or it creeps you out or scares you or something, just anything, always come to me. We can work on it. And, the rest is details, but there really needs to be an effort and an awareness on parents. They just can't assume it's okay. They can't assume that everyone else is kind of doing something to be the gatekeepers. They really have to assume that their children are going to see the worst possible things and be approached by predators, because it will happen. It's just a matter of where and when and how far it goes. But there has to be vigilance to start with.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Shively, Senior Advisor in Research and Data Analysis. EndSexualExploitation.org is the website. Very grateful for your time today. God bless you and God love you. Joining us right now by phone is the senior legal counsel for the National Center for Sexual Exploitation, Dani Pinter. Good morning to you, Dani.
Hi, how are you?
Praise be to God. I am alive, and that counts. How are you?
Good. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Amen. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you, by the way.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
Very grateful for your time. This week, there was the Epstein story has made it back to our headlines once again. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to focus on, this plague that's a part of our world, our existence, that seems to go unchecked by the governments of the world, the people of the world. It just keeps going and going. And so maybe you could start by giving us the backstory about Jeffrey Epstein. Refresh our memory. Who is this character? What were his crimes? And who is involved?
Right. Well, Jeffrey Epstein, titled himself a financier, a tax guru. And so he moved in very high circles, doing some sort of shady investment schemes for celebrities and high-profile people all around the world. Obviously, Prince Andrew is a close associate of his from the United Kingdom's royal family. And he was finally arrested for sex trafficking. He had been on the FBI's radar as early as 2006 for prostitution charges. He, eventually pled guilty to them, but he had, was sex trafficking many minors in Florida at that time. And the local law enforcement, the state law enforcement in Florida, was actually trying to prosecute him and trying to hold him accountable at that time. And the FBI swooped in, and he sort of got a sweetheart deal back then, which allowed him to continue his pervasive trafficking until he was finally arrested. I think it was in 2018, where he died in jail.
Wow. How did he recruit these girls? How is it he was able to find these young women that how did this happen? How do you get to be a young girl in Epstein's entourage?
Yeah, well, he, his close associate was Ghislaine Maxwell. It's, they were obviously in somewhat of a romantic relationship, but definitely a business partnership as well. And he used her, also others, but it's, he would, befriend them. So she would befriend them. She was attractive, very classy lady who would reach out to these girls and make them feel good. So in Florida, in her trial, it's described how she would approach these girls she knew were vulnerable. Most of them had kind of rough family backgrounds and financial instability. And so she would approach them and, tell them that they had this potential. She saw potential in them and that she was going to help them. They talked about how she went to the movies with them and really built them up. And then she would invite them over to the house, and that's where ultimately they would enter his circle, and the grooming would continue, and ultimately the abuse. But he also did this with, modeling agencies he would have. He had many people who would recruit victims for him.
Now, these victims, were they ultimately living on his island? Were they living in his houses, or were they just coming and going like the guests?
It was kind of different with each of them. There were several that would live with him for periods of time, either as like staff at his house. There were some who were quote unquote his massage therapists, and they would travel with him. So they would spend weeks or months at a time going to the island or going across Europe, traveling as staff members. But ultimately, he was just abusing them and selling them to others as well.
And how many of these victims have come out, in these last few years to raise awareness to this, to fight for some sort of justice?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the number on top of my head, but I know that it's several victims. There's, a lead group that really, were successful in getting him arrested and who were successful in getting his associate, just saying Maxwell, arrested. And I wish I had the exact number, but I think it was several, if not, a dozen.
It incredibly connected guy. I mean, I remember reading and looking at his background and how he sort of arose. Coming from a kind of obscurity, he was a teacher at a private school. All of a sudden, he's one of the most connected men on planet Earth, with the most powerful men and women in his Rolodex. How does that happen?
Yeah, that's what's one of the most suspicious things about his story is his resume is very weak. He seemed to be kind of a professional con artist. He was this kind of low-level professor, and then he ended up conning his way into working for a financial institution, and was then kind of involved in a pyramid scheme. And then there's sort of just a blank where all of a sudden he, has his own companies and is, very wealthy, and it's kind of confusing as to where the money came from. It's obviously been speculated that he got a lot of that money through sort of blackmail, and just sort of, he's a charming guy. He would con rich celebrity people into giving him large amounts of money to quote unquote invest without having to do much due diligence with them. So very interesting. I think ultimately, he's a con artist.
Although there's a great temptation to want to know who his clients were. I don't particularly feel like I should know that the names on that list, but nonetheless, some pretty well-connected people seeming to have flown to that island back and forth. Do you think there's a lot of pressure to keep that on the down low?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been pressure behind the scenes for a long time to keep that type of information under wraps. And, I hope now that there's such light has been shined on this, that it's so clear that he was guilty of these crimes, that he did hurt so many people. Ghislaine Maxwell was finally convicted of, working with him to commit these crimes. I would hope that that would force some transparency. There's many victims who have not gotten recourse, and many victims who are silenced over the years and told that they were liars. And so, I think it's right that they should be vindicated. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, we're 2 minutes to a break, and I do want to continue the conversation after, but I'm going to put this out there and get your initial comments. The story this week is the Attorney General in the U.S. Virgin Islands accused JPMorgan Chase and Company of servicing Jeffrey Epstein and financially, basically making it possible for him to conduct his operation down there. Well, it turns out this AG got fired for doing so. What is going on in this particular story?
Yeah, this is super interesting, but the banks, often track financial transactions for the purposes of reporting crimes when they see them. They're familiar with patterns, and I think that they sort of fail to pick up on those. And so it's interesting that there's this push to hold the banks accountable. I haven't seen that really before, so very interesting.
Well, I couldn't help but think about that time when Vice President Joe Biden, back under the Obama administration, went to Ukraine and had to apply pressure there to get an AG fired from investigating Burisma, which his son happened to be a part of, threatening holding back billions of dollars. It seems like this is a pattern that's repeated itself in this case. And ultimately, wouldn't we want, even if it's JPMorgan Chase or even in my case, I would say a Catholic bishop. I mean, if you're guilty of this crime, you ought to be held accountable.
Definitely. Absolutely. That's, holding those higher ups who are facilitating many criminals accountable is how you actually change the problem.
I find that it's very troubling to see the human sex slave trade to be so widely accepted, sort of given a pass. Not a lot it seems to be being done to stop this, but maybe I'm wrong. Could you help me understand just how much is being done to push back, to fight against what seems to be a massive amount of people in sexual slavery right now?
Yeah, I mean, the United States is far ahead of anyone else in doing something, so I don't want to say we aren't doing anything. We are. We have very strong anti-sex trafficking laws. We have civil remedies, so sex trafficking victims can also take sort of justice in their own hands and also sue the perpetrators or those that have profited from their sex trafficking. So those are good things, and I'm happy for that, but we definitely are not doing enough. I wish the federal government would do more to prosecute these crimes, especially online and against those online facilitators, because that's what would sort of really disrupt, rather than sort of targeting a few bad actors. That would disrupt the whole system.
Dani, speaking of sites here, one of the big criticisms that followed Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter was that he fired the essential the employees who were combating this sort of content on the website. And I'm curious to get your legal take on things like Section 230, which actually allows for some of these things to be promulgated on websites like Twitter or basically any website, and doesn't hold these websites accountable because they're not actually moderating this content. Do you think that Section 230 is going to be maybe done away with anytime soon, or is there anything that can be done to combat the protection of these websites to promulgate this type of content?
Yeah, Section 230 has really done some serious damage. Perhaps it was necessary in the beginning to provide some protections for the internet websites when it was first beginning, and not stifling sort of that growth out of fear of liability. But that was actually a very modest solution that Congress originally passed. The way that courts have interpreted it to be virtual blanket immunity, in my opinion, has been really disastrous. You have a major website like Twitter, which is just filled with child porn, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, also the open solicitation for child pornography that was occurring on Twitter. I mean, people would just literally openly tweet, looking for 10 to 15-year-olds, and then people would respond with links or ways to trade that child pornography. And that was reported countless times to Twitter, and they did not shut down that activity because why would they? They felt they could never be responsible for that. In fact, we have a case against Twitter on behalf of two minor children who they were extorted and blackmailed by a predator online to create some child sexual abuse material, child pornography, when they were 13. So very clearly children, and it ended up circulating all over Twitter. They reported it and begged Twitter to take it down, and Twitter responded, "We reviewed the material. It doesn't violate our terms. We're not taking it down." That's just completely outrageous that one of our strongest federal crimes against child pornography could just be blown off. And they're just really not concerned. So, yeah, I think 230 is a huge problem. It has been, especially for victims of sex trafficking. Children have tried to sue websites that have done similar things to like Twitter over and over again and failed because of 230, where Congress in 2018 amended CDA 230 to say it doesn't immunize platforms for sex trafficking, and yet we recently had the Ninth Circuit shoot down a case on behalf of, I think it was around 10 to 12 children and their parents who were suing the platform Reddit because repeatedly their child pornography was spread all over there and re-uploaded again and again, and the website, they were corresponding with the website. So it's not like the website didn't know. They knew, and they just didn't care because, every user and every activity on their site is dollars, and data that they can sell and advertisement eyes that they can tell the advertisers they're putting on their products. So, and the Ninth Circuit said, yeah, this is, it's terrible, but it still doesn't meet the FOSTA standard. And if that doesn't meet the FOSTA standard, I don't know what does. So you still have 230 blocking sex trafficking victims. It is before the Supreme Court on a different case right now. The Supreme Court will be hearing and interpreting 230 for the first time since it was originally passed back in 1996. It's a case, Gonzalez versus Google, and the victims there, the plaintiffs, are actually victims of a terrorist attack, and they're alleging that Google was amplifying terrorist recruitment content, and that ultimately led to a coordinated attack that happened online that resulted in the death of their family members. So it'll be very interesting to see what the court does with that, because that could obviously significantly narrow 230 down. And then you also have Congress attempting to pass the Earn It Act, which would be a further amendment to not allow immunity for child pornography.
So one thing that I'm curious about, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this, is, most people, for some reason, it's not very good, but people care more about animals than they do about humans. And we saw this very clearly whenever people were freaking out about Dr. Fauci and the snipping of the vocal cords of the puppies, and everybody was up in arms against that. And so, yeah, people have this weird connection that they love animals more than they love people a lot of times. And so is it possible to kind of treat these companies like we did with the mafia, get them for tax evasion, even though what we really want is for their trading and their criminal activity? It's what I saw yesterday, and I was shocked by how much support there was for this and how many people were sharing this and liking this and so on and so forth. I saw somebody post on Twitter to mass report this account, and I was like, okay, what is up with this account? It seems very innocuous. I went, and what a mistake. The account was basically saying, and I'm going to say this in as PG terms as I can, let's just say this person identifies as trans canine and publicly expresses her perverted love for animals. That I was like, this is legal. This is allowed to be on public platforms. This is allowed. And obviously that's less bad than the abuse of children, but perhaps that's the way to get these companies to fall in line. What do you think about that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's violating numerous policies, whatever platform it's on, and, potentially illegal. I think what you're getting at is sort of public pressure, and I agree that public pressure, it's usually what works. It's interesting because these platforms really seem to be doubling down. For example, this is sort of unrelated, I think. I think it was 12 or 15 attorneys generals wrote to Apple and urging them to change the rating for the app TikTok to be 17 plus, because there's a lot of really adult content on there, and also it is used all the time to groom children into sex trafficking. So adults are contacting kids and grooming kids on TikTok all the time. It's become such a problem that the highest levels of law enforcement are putting the platform on notice. And that was a push by the AGs, right, to public pressure, kind of like this. Let's get the public upset about them. Let's threaten their reputation. And Apple did not respond, but within days later, they lowered the rating for YouTube down to 12
wow.
plus, with no warning to users. So, if a parent had set up parental controls on their kids' application, like YouTube could have just appeared there now, and the parent would not know.
Yeah.
So it seems like these big tech companies, they've gotten so big and so arrogant, and they make so much money that I don't think that they are willing to give an inch or to budge. So, I hope that, if there's enough public outcry, and I think all these things add up, but ultimately I think, unfortunately, they need to know that they could potentially lose money. And so to me, I think liability is the biggest way that they'll be held accountable.
Yeah.
But through public pressure, we can get Congress to sort of, take away 230 or minimize 230 or change 230 or somehow force avenues of liability for the companies, because then their calculation changes. I could actually be sued and lose X amount of dollars. Now we'll care about it, unfortunately.
We're down to about a minute and a half now with Dani Pinter, Esquire, Senior Legal Counsel for the National Center for Sexual Exploitation. Let me ask you about that story about cartels saying they're making as much money, if not more, in the human trade than they are in drug trade. This is big business, and they are controlling what's going on at that border. And a lot of people in the border crisis are ignoring this, the plight of these humans that are stuck in their servitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about, let's say a kilo of cocaine, you can only sell that one time. Unfortunately, you can sell a person over and over. And now with the internet and sort of what we're talking about of this sort of ignoring of abuse content, these guys can also record, each assault and then continue to sell that repeatedly as well. So it's absolutely true that it's more profitable, and it's also less risky for them, unfortunately, because our law enforcement, and I think international law enforcement as well, cares a lot about prosecuting drug crime. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but a lot of resources are devoted to that, and not as many resources are devoted to investigating human trafficking. And in many ways, it can be more difficult to prosecute human trafficking crimes because, instead of just saying, I'm a police officer and I witnessed him in possession of this cocaine, you rely on human witnesses who are victims and who have been traumatized and have many fears and maybe language barriers, and that can be more difficult.
Yeah.
But as you said, people are more important.
Dani Pinter, thank you for your time today. Very appreciative of your insight onto all of this. Let's pray for an awareness and an end to this plight. Go to endsexualexploitation.org for a lot more details and great resources. That's endsexualexploitation.org. That's going to do it for hour number 1. God bless you. God love you. Thank you, and have a good day, and have a great weekend. It's First Friday. It's First Saturday. Enjoy that. Plus, it's Epiphany. But if you can hang out with us in the next hour, we'd love to have you. Dave Palmer's going to be on with us, the game show, and a lot more.